we killed a lot of enemy people. We killed some innocent people, some civilians that happened to be around the bad guys. You can see the emotion of American soldiers when that happens. You're just kind of focused on living and being the best version of yourself that you can be. I think you learn a lot in combat.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear a special combat story of one of the military's most revered leaders who many have never heard of but should. This is the experience of retired Colonel Bill Ostlund, a beloved mentor and leader developer who served 35 years in the Army, working his way up from a private and growing into combat command in some of the bloodiest fighting of any unit in the post-9/11 era. Bill's command in Kunar Province, recounted countless times in dozens of books, including Sebastian Junger's War and the documentary Restrepo, resulted in over 400 awards for valor and 3 medals of honor, all living honorees. This episode is an embarrassment of riches for those who want to know what real leadership looks like, what the burden of command actually means, how you show up after losing a soldier 6 hours into a 15-month deployment, or leading joint special ops task forces with Delta, DEVGRU, 160th, and other Tier 1 elements over thousands of operations. Bill Ostlund will remind many listeners of Todd Opalski and how he cared for and treated his soldiers, and explains why, so many years later, his soldiers and officers still seek his advice as they step into greater roles of responsibility in the military and their personal lives. I'm honored to have had a chance to spend this time with what so many think of as the pinnacle of battlefield leadership, and hope you enjoy this combat story as much as I did. Bill, thanks for taking the time to share your story with us today.
Yeah, Ryan, this is a great opportunity. I've enjoyed talking to you in the past and just really look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we hit record, in fact, we were talking about some folks you had influenced as a leader in the past who you're helping to continue to share with today. And I wanted to start off with how I came across your name to begin with, which was another one of your proteges, actually. And I don't even know if you will remember this person, but I went to ROTC with somebody who's still in active duty, Jordan Becker. He was in 173rd with you, and he had a big influence on me. He was a year older than me at Georgetown, and really taught me about accountability and responsibility as I was learning what the military was all about from an ROTC perspective. I interviewed him, probably the 4th or 5th interview I ever did on this. And he's gone on as a Green Beret, he's still in. But we were talking about the jump into Iraq, and just anecdotally, he was describing the types of things that you can only see in combat. And as you're getting ready to jump, he's like, there's an Air Force colonel here with us who doesn't even have a backpack, like no ruck, just got a book. And then I got Bill Ostlund over here. And I was like, who's Bill Ostlund? He goes, one of the best leaders I ever had. Then I had a subsequent interview with someone who brought you up. And I was like, I know this name. And I found you at the mutual company we worked at the time, from our veteran community. But I would just ask to kick it off, as you think back to that one event in your military career, and we're going to touch on so many, but the jump into Iraq, what do you remember from that event yourself, like being in that aircraft?
Yeah, first, I love telling the story of how I believe that jump occurred. And people can read the history books and say, hey, Turkey didn't let us in through Turkey into Iraq, didn't let 4th ID in, 173rd couldn't follow them, and therefore there was a jump. But there was one person the history books didn't capture, and he was a Creighton University ROTC Air Force captain. His name was Captain Roberts, and he deserves all the credit for the jump into Iraq, because the Air Force at the time was moving, tons and tons of cargo into Iraq, because the war had already started, and they were moving cargo into theater. The last thing they wanted 17 C-17s to do was sit on an airfield for a day for crew rest and then load up paratroopers, jump at night, and take another day of crew rest and lose all that cargo space. But Captain Rob, and the weather wasn't good. So Air Force said, hey, the weather's not going to break for days or weeks. The jump can't go in. And Captain Roberts kept saying, oh no, I can see there's going to be a break in the weather. And he held fast. General officers were calling him, how dare he do this? But he was our brigade like SWO, and he kept telling our brigade commander, Colonel Mayville, yep, there's going to be a window. I don't know when it is yet, but I'll know as we get closer. Colonel Mayville, based on this captain's information in the environment, moved all our stuff from the Port of Livorno that was going to be shipped to Turkey over to Aviano airspace and had it start being rigged either for airdrop or air land. So huge planning exercise. No one believed it. Air Force continued to crush Captain Roberts. And lo and behold, we're up at Aviano and there's a window. We're loading aircraft. I mean, when I pulled onto Aviano and saw 17 C-17s tail to tail at that time, I'm like, doggone, we're going to jump out of these things. And lo and behold, we loaded them up and started heading to Turkey. We had headsets on. SF was on the ground, and there's a lot of people that have consternation that we got credit for a combat jump. There were people on the ground, yes. Oh, just like in World War II when Pathfinders were on the ground, by the way. And our own LURS had been in there. Your
Yep.
former colleagues got them
Yep.
into that area. In fact, your former colleagues built that airfield. So we get in there, and all of a sudden we hear over the radio, start hearing transmissions, snowy, zero visibility or whatever, this and that. We're like, oh man, we're going to get turned around. And then we go over Turkey and we feel ourselves descending, and we hear clear skies, zero knots, clear sky. It came back every 60 seconds from our LURS, or every couple of minutes. And I looked across, and Mike Fenzel, who we were just talking about, was sitting across from me, third aircraft. He was third aircraft, first person right door. I was third aircraft, first person left door. And we both, eyes lit up. Hey, this is happening. So we write on our boards the jumps that go. And I'm sure they heard it on the ground, those 100 plus paratroopers, cheering that we were actually going to jump. Now, those who have jumped out of an aircraft with a combat load knows, most of the excitement is because you finally get to get that heavy load off of your body. But there is that bit that's what paratroopers dream about, is that opportunity. So we exited the aircraft. Some have read the stories. It was incredibly muddy, like thigh deep mud that people landed in. It took an incredible amount of time and effort to assemble everybody, just because it was soupy mud and we were scattered over a bit. And I can talk about C-17s later and their ability at that time. But the real story, back to tell me about the jump. It was euphoric on the aircraft. We had media crews on there. There was a bit of information operations going on. But more importantly, the next morning, it was beautiful, sunny. We started drying out, and I saw Captain Roberts, and I'm like, because I was a Battalion 3 at the time, and I was working with the Brigade 3 on all the planning. I'm like, damn, Captain Roberts, how were you able to predict that window? He looked me stone cold in the eye, and he said, I had no idea there was going to be a window. He said, but I knew if I stood up in front of that brigade staff and all those paratroopers and said we weren't going to jump, someone would have killed me. He said the Air Force wasn't located here. He said they'd just call and yell at me. And if I was wrong, I'd get yelled at one time. But if I was right, we'd get the jump in. And I'm like, holy smokes, that guy has a part of his anatomy that should require a wheelbarrow to move across the airfield. And I just laughed. And you talk about how young GOs could be pivotal in history. That junior officer, right or wrong, it's my story to share.
Yeah.
Right there. In there will probably be somebody from the Air Force contacting you and trying to clarify the facts, but those are the facts according to me.
I will say, for those who are unfamiliar with SWOs, like the weather officers, basically your meteorologists who are from the Air Force, all the aviation units have them. They give you the blessing to go out on flights. So for those who haven't been in an aviation talk, you're standing there with your co-pilots surrounding this poor Air Force person who's on an island by themselves, no one else around all these Army folks. And you're like, you got to make sure the weather's good for us to go. Tell us it's going to be better. And they're at the mercy of whatever instruments they have. And it can be an isolating experience for them. So kudos to this guy for pulling through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might have used the wrong term after I heard you repeat it, the SWO. The surface warfare officers in the Navy that are listening to that, and the Air Force people that want to correct me. Hey, he was a weather officer in an airborne brigade from the Air Force, and he got the jump in. Okay.
And he jumped with you. That is cool.
Yeah,
That's
he
really
did.
Cool.
Yeah, he absolutely did. So,
all right.
Yeah, it was very, very cool.
Okay.
But again, as we were talking about earlier, there's one country in the world that can do joint combined arms warfare well, and we happen to be citizens of that country. And everybody else can talk about it, but as we're seeing in current events, not everybody else can do it. So that's just an example of the joint team doing a joint operation.
That's a good point to bring up. So typically I like to start out with your origin story and what you were like growing up. So I'm going to put that on pause for just a moment. For those who are going to watch this months or years later, we're a week in effectively to what's going on in Ukraine with Russia and Ukraine right now. Bill, I know you've served on joint task forces. You've spent a lot of time in Europe. Just your initial thoughts, if you don't mind sharing, kind of how you see this kicking off. You mentioned the combined arms side. Just from what you've seen in your long tenure in the military and senior roles, how do you view this conflict right now?
Well, I appreciate that question, and without breaking my arm, patting myself on the back or anything, I also graduated from the Fletcher School of International Security. It was called the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at that time, but I had a phenomenal group of professors there. Many I stay in touch with now. Completed my PhD coursework in international security studies with some of the best minds in the country. So I do have an opinion of this, and I listen to the very experienced people. I don't call them talking heads. I mean, I've got all the respect in the world for General Petraeus and General Keane, and I think they're helping America understand that very well. But in a email exchange with General Petraeus, who I stay in contact with, I said something to the effect of, I think we're learning a lot about the Russian army this week. And one of those things is that they can't do joint combined arms warfare. And I honestly, from the time I was enlisted person and we feared the Soviet Union, did not think that they could fight like Americans, and maybe that was 18-year-old naivete. But I've also got to see them in Syria in what they could do and what they couldn't do. Now we get to see them when their version of their commander-in-chief is absolutely, his survivability depends on their success, and they can't figure it out. Now, they might rubble Ukraine. They're certainly causing an incredible amount of damage to the Ukrainian infrastructure, and no doubt killing Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. What the world in America should note, I guarantee they don't have a field grade officer investigating every accusation of civilian killed. I don't think they have accountability of their fallen Russian sons, like we do, and we might talk about one of those events. But yeah, we're learning a lot about one of our nemesis. Now, they also have nuclear weapons, and we've got to be cognizant of that. But America's learning a lot watching them, like Russia and China and Iran learned about us, watching us for 20 years.
Yep.
So,
and I know you plan just that jump we talked about. I think we take it for granted, but like you've had to plan it at a very high level for years. So you understand the pain that goes into these combined arms and joint exercises and in combat. And I think maybe for a lot of us, we just took it for granted, honestly, of how good we were at operating there.
Well, I've got a book on my shelf over here called Prodigal Soldiers. And Prodigal Soldiers is a book that was written about the U.S. military's transformation after Vietnam. How do we learn? How do we get better? So there's a chapter about we established the National Training Center, and the culture and the ideas that went into that. And we established Red Flag for our aviation counterparts. And Navy had an exercise, but culturally, we agreed in our own service cultures to be train hard and be self-critical. And then eventually that morphed into, well, heck, we got all these service great training areas. How do we start overlapping? And of course, we had that period of Grenada, right? A very small operation that showed, boy, we're not very good at joint operations. I mean, okay, we pulled this one off. And it came at a cost, obviously, of some very good, Rangers and special operators that were involved in that, but it could have been a lot worse. So there was a lot of luck, if the Ranger God was circling over that in OV-10 or something, but something kept us a little bit straighter than we should have been 4 years after the Iranian issues and our identification that, hey, we need to get better, so.
Yeah. So it's so interesting what's playing out. Now, with that said, I want to take a step back to the origin story here. And I'm going to ask people to trust me on this because usually I jump in a different way. But if people can't tell already, and we will get into it, you just have to trust me on the leadership lessons and skills we're about to draw out from you. But with that in mind, as you look back to you as a kid, would you have envisioned that you would have had this career leading soldiers? I'm not really just talking about the military, but it seems like leadership is such a key part of who you are, whether you were in command or the non-command roles that you had in leadership, trying to develop others. When you were a kid, was that really important to you, leading teams, small groups? What were you like growing up in that sense?
Yeah, I would say, I think we all develop based on the environment we're in. So if I could take us to kind of northern Minnesota, rural town, Detroit Lakes, Minnesota is an area that is, within 25 miles or a circumference, there's 412 lakes. It's a vacation community. Largely people from Fargo, Moorhead area come down, have little tiny cottages on the lakes. But for 9 months a year, there's very few people in that area. And there's a lot of woods and there's a lot of frozen lakes and there's a lot of opportunity for the few kids that live out in that area. And there was 3 of us, Danny, Denise, and I, that did everything together, from crazy things. You and I, we both have 3 sons. We would not let our kids do, go out on a boat or an inner tube in the spring and chop off a piece of ice so you can float down a river like Tom Sawyer until it crashes into the bridge. And then you got to time it right to, not go under the bridge and drown, and, spearfishing and hunting and doing these things. But it made a sense of resilience at a very young age, because I mean it's cold and we didn't think about it, but you could like die out there, when it was like quite a bit of the time. But we were entrusted to run from sun up and sundown. We spent a lot of time out. My family would say that, I was going to grow up to be a businessman. At 5 years old, we lived right across from a golf course. I was collecting golf balls and selling them back to the golfers. I was setting up pop stands. I had Billy and Danny's lawn service going when I was 10, mowing all these yards. And I still remember mowing a yard that's smaller than my, you know, house is right now, and getting $70 for it in 1974, which was, I don't know, do the conversion. That's probably like $1 million, but so I was always energetic. But where did that come from? The Scandinavian background. Grandfather was, I recall him as a very, very handsome, large man that was a highway patrolman, and had an incredible service ethic and an incredible work ethic. And that is what our family, the Ostlunds, really gravitated to, is blue collar, hard work. And that was like your, that was your AMs and RCOMs getting told by grandpa, hey, that's good work. Getting told by dad, hey, that's great, did good job on the yard, or go redo the yard. That's like getting a counseling statement. So chopping wood and doing hard manual labor, but with people I respected, planted some seed in me. But then we had a pivot, and my parents moved to Omaha, Nebraska, to the suburbs of Omaha. And I thought we'd won the lottery or something. It was a huge house in the suburbs comparatively. So moved from one kind of extreme to something else. But it was right before my freshman year. I didn't know anybody. It's harder to meet people before school started. So just by chance, and I'm not sure why, but I started reading books on Vietnam, and I gravitated, because it was set in 1979. It was 5 years after the war. Books on light infantrymen and rangers and things were coming out, just like we see right now in our war. Great books written, real time. And I just delved into them, and I was reading about a book every 3 days. That's what I did for a summer. And by the end, before my freshman year started, I knew I was going in the service. And I have somewhat of a humorous story, or at least I think it's funny, is I absolutely, even though I read all these airborne and ranger and light infantry and LURPs, I knew I was going to go in and be a Marine infantryman. I was going to be a Marine infantryman, short period of time, come out, go to business school. And again, I think that's a sense of leadership. I'd be working in the business world. So as happens, or used to happen, the day after your junior year of high school, summer starts, the recruiters get the list, because then I guess you're free game. And a Marine Corps recruiter called me, and I just told him, I just turned 17. And I said, hey, I'm going to be your easiest recruit. I want to do this. I'm smart enough to go into Marines. I'm fit enough to go into Marines. I want to be a Marine infantryman, this and that. And he's like, well, come on. And I said, my parents will support it. He goes, well, come on down. So I figured at the end of the week I'd be signed in, right? So I go into his office, and he was an E5, I remember, taller guy. And we're talking and giving me the normal Marine pitch. I'm like, yep, I'm all in. I'm good. I said, I can get my parents to sign me up to be a infantryman, this and that. And he's like, whoa, hold on now. Hold on. In the Marines, not everybody gets to be an infantryman. He goes, we put you through training, and then we'll assess you, and then we'll tell you what you're going to be. And quite honestly, he wasn't quite that articulate. And I was thinking, okay. And I asked the question. I knew enough about rank at that time because I'd read all these books. I'm like, Sergeant, what are you? And he said, well, me, I'm a Marine infantryman. And I literally, as a 17-year-old young man, and this isn't revisionist, I thought, damn, if the Marines made this guy an infantryman, they're going to make me a brain surgeon, and I don't want to be a brain surgeon. I want to be an infantryman. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to go think about this. Well, there was this little short, not so fit Army guy with a mustache that shared the vestibule, and the Army recruiter was right over, and he was smoking a cigarette, not the epitome of, you know, what I really was trying to join, but he was smart, and he had to love having this Marine next to him. And he's like, well, Marine, how you doing today? And I'm like, Sergeant. He was the E7. I said, Sergeant, I don't think I can be a Marine. They can't guarantee me an infantryman. This is 1982. And Reagan was building up the military's army was expanding by like 250,000. And he's like, well, why don't you come on in here? And they had these old tech tapes, and he puts one in, and Bradley's just came in. There's Bradley's jumping over berms, shooting targets, Apaches that we were talking about. They're flying over top. Yep, brand new. And I'm like, well, I want to be an infantryman. He puts in an airborne tape. It's got this haunting music, guys jumping onto Fryer Field, and I'm like, Fryer Drop Zone. I'm like, oh wow. And he knew I was hooked, right? Then he puts out the Ranger tape. Guys in Zodiacs, camouflaged up. And all he said is, hey, I can guarantee you can get in that Zodiac if you meet all the requirements the Army's going to lay in front of you. But he said, it's all on you. And this little, I don't want to call him dumpy, but that's kind of the word that comes to mind, dude had me sold. 3 days later, my parents signed the paperwork. I was unassigned Ranger, heading to 1st Ranger Battalion. And like he said, it was on me. Is if I met the wickets, I could be an airborne Ranger infantryman. And then my reading just, exploded. Then I had a purpose, and then I started reading more and more and more and more.
Wow.
But that's my, how do you end up from a juvenile delinquent up in Minnesota through Omaha, Nebraska into the Army? But I still thought I was only going to be in for a few years. I graduated when I was 17 from high school. Just wanted to grow up and see the world. I didn't think I was mature enough to go to college. And interestingly, many people on this podcast probably know the name John Noggle. Dr. John Noggle wrote Learning to Eat Soup with a Knife, which was the premier coin book at the time. Well, John was my first office mate when I taught at West Point. And we were purposefully put together. They figured a little bit of my who would rub off on John, and a little bit of John's intellect would rub off on me, because he was literally the first Rhodes Scholar I'd ever met. He's a great guy. But John, when I told that story to John about, I just joined the Army because I didn't think I was mature enough to go to college, just off the top of his head, and he's just a kind guy, and he just said, that probably shows you more maturity than you'd ever know. And something to that effect. And again, I'm a John Noggle fan. But that's something that always stuck in my head. That was a peer mentorship in a sense, because I probably had a little bit of imposter complex going as I made it through Fletcher, but I worked very hard. I came out as, a PhD candidate, never intended on getting it, but it was just a challenge. Could I do that? And then I got to West Point. All I wanted to do is spend time with cadets. I had enough academics, teaching American politics and international security studies was very rewarding, but it was a means to spend time with cadets and do the things with the Department of Military Instruction, where I thought I was most value added in that academy.
So. And I have several follow-up questions, but I want to underscore, because the way that you humbly describe this, I didn't actually know that's how you pronounce his last name. I always thought it was Nagel, but yeah. Noggle. Okay. So for those who aren't familiar, like, that book that he wrote was truly like, this is the pinnacle of coin operations effectively at the time. It was huge. And I believe when you say you were teaching at West Point, not just any role, you were in the social sciences department, right? Which is kind of like, I think that's where Petraeus was too at some point along the way. It's an important career marker. Not everybody gets to do that. So just underscore that bit.
Well, and that story too is, if we want to have some humor in this story. So as roommates, John Noggle dropped this huge manuscript with a yellow cover thing on my desk. And he's like, hey, this was in 1998. No, it was in 1998. And he said, hey, this is my book. It's going to be published. I want you to read it. And I started reading like the first 3 pages, and I literally put my head down on my desk on his book. He goes, what are you doing? In 1998, my critique was, John, this is so boring. Nobody is ever going to read your book. And he goes, okay. And subsequently, in 2001, I think, or so, it was mandatory reading from the chief of staff of the Army. So I finally read it, and he gave me a signed copy, but he didn't has any no words, just John Noggle.
Awesome.
That's enough coming from John. That's his version of "I told you so."
Told you so. So a couple questions from this story of you getting into the military. And I would just say, number one is the stories I've heard from folks on this podcast after interviewing 60 something people of what happens in the recruiter's office between branches is literally, it's just a book in and of itself, or a movie or a TV show, because the salesmanship and how it's positioned and what they do depending on who comes in is just so funny. So I love that story. On a more serious note though, it sounded like you were really interested in the Marine Corps, which has its own character and lineage and history. Why would you have chosen the infantryman lifestyle over the Marine Corps kind of allure?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know. I guess because all I had read about is young infantrymen, and I like that independence and that challenge that was conveyed in books of that. Without getting too, I don't know, spiritual or anything, I never really thought I was going to live past 20. I just didn't. I didn't have a vision, and I can talk about what that day was like when I was literally a 20-year-old. Airborne Ranger corporal, three weeks out from being a sergeant, jump master, and Ranger qualified. The only one in the regiment who was, 19 Ranger, jump master. I was a specialist when I went to jump master school. So that place provided me some incredible opportunities to have responsibility some never have. That is putting, at the time, out of a C-141, C-130s, 100 plus men, some twice my age, being responsible for putting them onto and out of an aircraft at night. Who gets that opportunity at 19? Not a lot of people. Airborne Rangers, right? Those are the only ones that get that opportunity and get that trust. So why I loved everything about the Marine Corps culture, but and I'm a huge Marine fan now. Why? Because their ethos is so much like the Rangers. I think that both are very proud, but have a balance of humility. In Rangers who are arrogant and talk down to other people, that they're usually not in an organization that long. That's the thing, especially in the Ranger Officer Corps. We know we're going back to the conventional Army. I mean, that's part of the Abrams charter. The NCOs are starting to rotate more. The global war kind of disrupted that a little bit. So we got to be cautious as Rangers and humble, because the big Army is still the big Army, and the Rangers get a lot of visibility, but they're a very, very small part of the big Army machine. The Marine Corps has that ethos to a huge degree. Now, I learned over time, and again, I don't besmirch, I'm not trying to, but the Marines are also phenomenal at information operations and showing their very best foot all the time. They send their very best people out of the Corps into joint assignments. So I'm on 3 joint staffs, or COCOMs, I'll say, STRATCOM, CENTCOM, and SOCOM. The Marines I worked with, phenomenal. Why? Because that's where they keep their people that need work. They keep them at home, closer to the flagpole. The people that can represent them well, I mean, that's just a great business model. I mean, good on them. And, the Marines have figured out to wear the same uniform forever instead of change it every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And, there's some pride in that. I mean, yeah. So that's the deal. I kind of learned that the Ranger culture was exactly what I was looking for in the Marine Corps, that sense of real pride and esprit. And so I found it in another location. But I don't even joke with Marines about jokes, Army or Marines. I just say, hey, I just respect the heck out of that service.
So I know as we look at your time in service, there's a Desert Storm piece, and then Balkans. We'll get back to Iraq 2003, but I don't want to lose this point that you mentioned. Like, you didn't think you'd make it past 20. Can you talk just a little bit more about that? I think it's surprising given the presence that you have and how much you read and what you were trying to do. It seemed like you'd be in the place you wanted to be. Where did that come from?
Yeah, well, one of the pivotal points in my career in life was I showed up in 1st Ranger Battalion the morning of 25 October 1983. I didn't know it at that time, but the battalion, and we used to do our Ranger indoctrination program at battalion level. So I showed up Savannah, Georgia, first Battalion's RIP program that morning. I didn't know that hours earlier they were jumping into Grenada. So there were only a few people, the RIP cadre, who were very pissed they didn't get to go into combat, right? And that's the Ranger mentality. They didn't get to go, but they were charged because of their duties to receive us, and they needed to continue to receive us because they didn't know how many casualties they were going to have, and they had to prep us as quick as they could to move forward. We didn't, and we ended up staying there for quite some time, but I got to see maturity with they were all looked old to me, but heck, they were only, 24, 25-year-old staff sergeants that were in charge of us, training us, very mature, very calm, very methodical. And I felt ready if I was called forward. I was certainly naive, but I felt, okay, I can contribute if they call me forward. And we got held there for a few weeks, and the battalion returned at the end of November, I think, maybe middle of November, took some leave. But my first day in the battalion, they drove us up the hill, was on 6th December, 1983. And all of them were combat vets, had, combat jumps and CIBs. And that was pretty rare in 1983 because we'd been out of combat for a long time. In fact, there were only 2 Vietnam vets in our battalion, in our company. And what was interesting, and again, I kind of consider myself a people watcher, even at a young age, just kind of trying to understand. All of these guys were like heroes in my mind, but they were all very humble, and they came back to very little fanfare, and we just started training. And they're like, hey, now we even have a better appreciation for what we've got to be prepared to do. They did hot washes, AARs, incorporated that into training, but they were trained good when they went. So they kind of were on course, right? So growing up in that organization that really understood in training was just foundational in my life. I had super mentors throughout. So, a funny thing in the Rangers at that point in time is that when you graduated from Ranger School, and you generally go between 6 and 12 months after arriving, your cadre or your chain of command assesses you, they lobby for you. You go to pre-Ranger, really great program there. It's a couple weeks academics, a field problem, not a haze. And then you go to Ranger School. Ranger School was not viewed as, some hard impossible thing. It was viewed as a gate. Everybody does it. Everybody's ranger qualified. The pack clerk's ranger qualified. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody is ranger qualified. It's just something you got to do. So we went there. But interestingly, when you came back, and I graduated, I turned 19 in ranger school, came back, the first sergeant, tells you, hey, good job. That's what you're expected to do, whatever. And, but you also get to put in for your next school. Well, people watcher. So I'd watch my, peers or people a couple months ahead of me come in, and everybody put in for Halo and scuba school. That's pretty cool. Both of those are really, really cool. But what would happen is they'd get a slot and they'd be within weeks or months of going, and a staff sergeant would re-enlist and he'd take their slot and they'd go back in the queue. I thought I was a little bit smarter, so I played a game and I put in for jump master school. It was a 19-year-old PFC, and my slot came out like a few months later. So I showed up. I went with my platoon leader, who I just connected with and went to dinner with the other day. It was awesome. And my section leader, Garvin Terrell, was a big man and a great leader. And as they're going through the list, the black hat in charge, really handsome, blonde-haired, wavy, too long a hair. And we'd call him the Marlboro Man, because back in the day they had a commercial with the Marlboro Man, and he was literally standing at the podium smoking. People can't even fathom that today, but that's kind of how the world worked in 1984, I guess. And he was going down the roster, and he's like, Specialist Ostlund. He goes, are you promotable? I'm like, not yet, Sergeant. And he goes, well, you ain't graduating from this course. And just under my, breath or inside voice, I go, well, we'll see about that. And my section leader, he's the one that got me to graduate, because he hit me in the back of the head so hard that my face bounced off the table. And I think Marlboro Man thought, okay, well, at least this, cocky specialist is going to be disciplined routinely. And my section leader was just like, you should, there were some choice words right there. And then we went through the class, and obviously I graduated, but it was fun. It was, again, I say that was a very good lesson in humility and discipline.
Oh, geez. All right. So we're talking, we're still early 80s. What I want to do, just because there's so much that happens, and I want to dig into the leadership experiences you have when we're talking Afghanistan years later. Can we jump to maybe the first time you find yourself in combat? And maybe that's Desert Storm. I don't actually know that first time, but could you talk through where you're at in your career and what that first experience was like for you?
Yeah. So, pivoting from the 25th of October in a good 4-year experience in the Rangers, I extended for three months to just make E6 so I could transition into the National Guard as an E6. And my dad saw, hey, Nebraska National Guard has this unit that's jumping out of airplanes. And at the time, Reagan expansion, they had a LURS unit. So I joined that. It was a phenomenal unit, Guard unit, which set some things in place for later. So I was in that for 2 years, graduate, I had the Army convert every school I went to credits, and I clept, and I did everything. And I was able to graduate through ROTC in 4 semesters, and was back. I graduated like December 22nd or something, December 20th, and I started BOLIC January 7th. So to me, it was just another assignment. I treated school like a ranger mission. It was utility. And I had a sense of purpose. I thought, I think if I graduate with a high enough GPA, the Army will send me back to school to get an education, get a quality education. And that happened.
Wow.
But then, so I went to BOLIC. I'd been to really all the schools people like to go to on Fort Benning. So I got to my unit on 1 August 1990. Now, what's important about that is I went into 101st, a great historical organization, the Rakasans, and it was 3rd Battalion 187. And 2 August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. 7 August 1990, we got alerted to go to combat. And literally on 11 September, we flew to Saudi Arabia. Differences, juxtaposing the Ranger experience with this experience. 101st wasn't prepared. 101st hadn't been to combat since Vietnam, and there was a little bit of we've been left out when it came to Grenada. We've been left out when it came to obviously Iran in 79, and they weren't part of that. They weren't part of Grenada, or in any other things, weren't told that they were going to go to Lebanon when we had the bombing of the barracks there. So there was a little bit of complacency, and I hate that word. But I think that is it. Why do I say that? Well, on my first day, I was told, hey, you're going to be the arms room officer. Perfect for me. I've been a rifle company for 4 years. I went in there knowing what a Ranger arms room looks like. It's part of our creed, care of equipment, so I went in there and every weapon was visibly dirty and or rusty. And I'm like, wow. Walk through there, not being judgmental, but I went back, and at the time we had that thing, a weapon system called the Dragon, and it had bottles and batteries, and I opened those up, and those were all not charged and dead and all this. And I opened up some NOD cases. They were pretty new in the Army at that time, and they were damp. And I'm like, wow, that ain't too good. So I went and talked to the former arms room officer and just said, hey, these are kind of dirty. Yeah, well. We came in and took a 4-day, and we're going to clean them sometime this week. And I'm like, okay. Let's talk to the first sergeant. Again, trying not to be judgmental or know it all. I just said, I think we got to take these out. I said, I've been in a rifle company. I think rifle companies rotate around rifles. Maybe we ought to clean them. And the M60 bags were taped shut and rusty and stuff. So we did take them out and we cleaned them, and I'm not besmirching the people. It was just the culture. And then the next day, kind of quasi, the balloon starts going up, and I think it had a little bit of credibility. It was an initial success, but instead of going home and gloating on that, I went home and looked and thought, holy smokes! Today I ran across some first lieutenants who are so smart. I don't think, maybe I made the wrong decision. I was a pretty smart non-commissioned officer, but these first lieutenants, they know a lot. And we had some really good officers in that unit. And I was like, holy smokes. So what that injected into me was the need to self-study. And I thought I was pretty good at that, because the Rangers, if people ever think, Rangers are like, kind of brutes and dumb, that's at their own peril, because some of the empirically smartest people in the Army go through that regiment. I mean, when you look at scores and education and the NCOs, many of them pursue degrees, and it's a learning organization. It's a culture to learn and be smart and contribute. And you're graded on effects, right? It's effects based. So again, if you're a 19-year-old and you're delivering effects, you're rewarded. If you're 30-year-old person not delivering effects, you're kicked out of the unit. That's the way it goes, and it's a good culture. But so I kind of started doing even more self-study coming home, and after that first assignment in 101st, fortunately we had Desert Shield, which was nothing but training time, and people started learning real quick. I mean, you can't even fathom it today, but I was loading squads with weapons and ammunition in the back of my little Ford Ranger, driving out to the ranges so we could shoot. I mean, everything was waived during desert, because all the equipment was heading overseas. So it was a very unique experience. So getting into Desert Storm, the Rakkasans did, the quasi largest air assault in history, went up to Highway 8, and did a blocking position. Excuse me. We got to see
Bill, were
You
you
know,
on that?
yeah.
You were on that air assault?
Yeah. The lightning in the storm. That was part
So
of our,
sorry to interrupt. Was that your first time like going down range? Was the
yeah, that was
largest
my
air assault?
first combat experience. And we'd been hanging out, in the desert, literally. Each platoon had about 3 or 4 camo nets, and that's what we lived in out of our rucksacks, and for months on end. MREs, 5-gallon water cans, rotate back to, the Fob Eagle, I think is what it was called, huge tent city. Then right back out there. They called it the covering force mission, but all we got to do was train. And if I could digress for young leaders here, I was very focused on training because of the Ranger 25 October experience, being prepared, 1 August not being prepared. So I was like, I'm going to invest every one of these days. But about November timeframe, months into this, training 7 days a week, morale wasn't real high, and I could tell that. So I told my platoon, I said, hey, check this out. I said, obviously we have some morale challenges here. We weren't as smart back then, or I wasn't as smart back then. So I said, this is what we're going to do. Let's just take a day. And my only task to everybody is write a training schedule. If you were in my shoes, what would you do for a week? And they did it. And, they had a day. And that night, I read through, and we all had little mag lights, and the bulbs were precious. And I was reading through and consolidating my notes on this. And what I learned from that experience is I had privates who thought we needed to do much more training, but they needed to know how to call for fire, do medical tasks, more on maneuver drills and stuff. And I had some leaders who thought, hey, we're all trained up,
Oh yeah.
and we should just kind of rest and prepare for the big one, which we didn't know when it was coming. But by being able to take that information and kind of make a platoon critical task list, and really find out the real issue. Here was the morale issue, and this still almost brings tears to my eyes, seriously, is for the most part, the platoon was upset that we were training from PT time, because we did PT in the desert, into the night and doing night training, and they didn't have time to do weapons maintenance to their standard or write letters home. It was days before email, and there was none of that. It was letters you could write on an MRE box and write free in the corner, and that would go to your parents or whatever. That's how the mail system worked back then. But I do get emotional about this. When you talk about the love of the American soldiers, if a platoon leader in the Russian army right now is asking their people why their morale is low, it's not because they don't have time to do weapons maintenance. And it's not because they don't have time to write letters home. So I learned a lot about myself and the American soldier, my soldiers at that time. So
Do you think that was a factor of you having been prior enlisted, Bill, or was it just kind of reading people the way you described and seeing what was going on around you, and this is the best way to solve the problem?
Well, I think it's both, actually. If I self-analyze Bill Ostlund, the two things I know about myself is I remember when. And what I mean by that, going back to my stories about my grandpa and my dad, I remember what it was like to be praised and just have a crossword, and how that affected me emotionally and how it affected my motivation. Likewise with teachers that I respect. Quite honestly, even as a young kid, if I didn't respect somebody, their words didn't mean anything to me. But people that I respected, their words resonated and have been categorized in my being. So I remember when, and I say I'm not a hypocrite. Doesn't mean I'm perfect, but at least I have a conscience, and that drives to action changing guilt. And I've got a vignette when I just totally blew it with my battalion staff one time, but at least I was self-aware enough to fix it, and ultimately get all great effects from it. But the other thing about being enlisted, is my heart is with enlisted soldiers, because I think they're better at technical tasks than I ever was. I mean, I was a 90 gunner. I thought I was a rock star, young Ranger in NCO. But my heart of hearts, I knew I didn't have the passion for the technical nuances of individual skill training and mechanics in the stuff that really, really good NCOs are good at. They're good at everything I do, but they also have this passion and interest for knowing how the radio works and making the radio work, and how the weapon systems work and making them work most effective. I can do that okay, but it's not a passion of mine. But interestingly, it's what lieutenants noticed in me as a young NCO as well. I had an opportunity when my section leader, again, 90 was like a Carl Gustav, or an anti-tank, reloadable anti-tank weapon, an anti-personnel weapon. It's 37 and a half pounds, 53 inches long. It was a beautiful system. And I knew a lot about it and could train on this system. But what they noted is when the section leader left, just by chance, we were going to the field and planning some training. And I dove in like there's no tomorrow, only because that's what I was passionate about. Planning, training, resourcing, asking questions, going talking to the XO, this and that. I don't know where that came from. But I knew, like, one of the things I hated going to, it didn't happen often in Rangers, but I hated going to the field not doing anything or waiting on something. I'm like, if I'm out in the field, I want to be doing something. I'll work all day long, all night long, but don't put me out there, and keep me out there not doing anything. And in 101st, I mean, we would do that a lot, at a higher direction, and I'd take care of my piece of the pie. But my point is, if you put a soldier out in a field, and especially on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, you better be working them. I mean, to the point that they're so exhausted they can't be thinking about it being Friday, Saturday, or Sunday night. And you can dial up any soldiers I've ever had. They did never were sitting on their rucksack on Friday night, Saturday, or Sunday if we were in the field. And quite honestly, I didn't like being there unless we were doing some high-end collective training. So, but yeah, so it does come a little bit to being enlisted as well.
Got it. So as we think about that air assault, that's fascinating. Going in, like, were you on a 60 going in?
No, on a 47.
On a 47. Yeah. What was going through your head? I mean, this is the first time you're going in. You've been in for what, 7 years, or maybe less, because you had the 2 years in college. What were you thinking about at that time?
I think most infantrymen flying into combat or moving towards the enemy in some fashion, I think most think that this is what I trained for. This is right. I mean, I spent a long time of first several years in the Army, 4 years in the Rangers, and 2 years in the National Guard, and a year in training. I was pretty fit. I knew what I was doing, and I kind of thought, I'm kind of like a pro athlete that never gets to play the game, right? And in combat's not a game, but the competition is, high, is Olympic quality, is pro quality, and that I mean, it's 3-dimensional chess, right? And it's challenging, and I never want anybody to take, and listen to 60 or 90 minutes and go, oh, he thinks combat's a game. No, I don't. I spent 6 years in combat. I mean, it's not a game. But it is a competition. It's a high-end competition, and smart, prepared people, fit people do better at that competition than others. And I thought that I was where I needed to be. So we are assaulted in. I can't remember what it's called, but two Humvees underneath the 47, kind of bumper to bumper. We landed about 40 kilometers south of Highway 8. We had a phenomenal scout team that, in those days, we just didn't have the equipment or training, but they went in with broken motorcycles and they broke down and they had to, do the recon the route. And these guys did, like, no kidding, Ranger, LERP, Scout sort of stuff. They were out there on their own, not the resources we had in the global war. And they did the best they could. Motorcycles broke down, they cached them, stashed them, hit them, and kept walking with these heavy ass rucksacks and marked our route. This is days when, like, I had a GPS, but they just came out.
Yeah.
Just came out. They were big, like boxes as big as a laptop. And, we were the lead platoon for our battalion right behind the S3. We had, like, tank ditches to clear and fill in with shovels, and so that the rest of the people behind us could get there. And then we got up to Highway 8, kind of unmolested or whatever, and set in a defense. And I was looking into the town of Al Qadir, and before too long, we had people coming out of the town trying to surrender. And it was, that was my first interaction with the population. We didn't go through COIN and how to work with the population training back then. It was, you got briefed on the ROE. American soldiers are just good humans. So we're not, feeling like they're a threat, and, can talk to the leadership, told them, the only way I'm going to take you as a prisoner is if you bring a weapon out here. And if you bring a weapon, you need to have it slung down, this and that. And they were just beside themselves. We wouldn't put them on aircraft and move them away from the area. And it was sad to see people in that. We had people come through. I remember the first enemy casualty I saw was a Iraqi Republican Guard tank captain. And he was wounded pretty hard, but he was conscious. And all I remember looking at this man, he was a handsome man, the big, Iraqi mustache going. And I just thought that could be me right there. He's just doing what his country asked him to do. And, we took good care of him, obviously got him medevac, and I hope he survived. But that was the first casualty I had. And, I think leaders need to teach their people, or train their people, not to hate other people. And sometimes that's hard. And in a counterterrorism task force, it was really hard sometimes not to cheer kinetic strikes and stuff. But people that have been around me know, there is no cheering in the jocks and stuff. And I make the comment is, hey, I'm the only one on the blame line here. And I don't have a pass on the 10 commandments. And I, in my heart and mind, believe I've got some hard questions coming when I'm standing outside the gates. And I've had priests and chaplains and others here that hear me make that comment and send me all sorts of things. How, the Bible says it's okay, this and that. I'm like, okay, that's your interpretation. My interpretation, somebody, I think his name was Moses, carried down 10 rules and he got them from somewhere. I don't have a waiver on them. So, that's just the way it goes. But, I don't lose too much sleep about that, but I don't think we should be cheering while we're doing our business. It's, that part that is not a game for us to partake in.
To be fair, though, there are several events where you're in combat and you've got reporters watching everything you do. So at least you've got some eyewitnesses to account for your alignment with the 10 commandments.
Well, sometimes, we'll see. And that's another interesting topic, right? Is, back in the 90s, there was that whole, we controlled the press some way, shape, or form. And that was an experience, right? What did we learn from that? Well, what I learned from it is it's better to have media around than not. And it's better to be transparent and provide them the opportunity to see the American soldier in action. And when I jump forward to battalion command, we deployed in 2007. What happened in 2007? The iPhone came out, Facebook came out, the explosion of social media. And there was an idea that we're going to tell soldiers they're not going to take phones, into theater. And I was like, okay, first of all, how are we going to actually control that? Second of all, so can they take cameras? Yeah, they can take cameras, but they can't take phones. Okay. How about if we just embrace the fact that everything's going to be seen and heard, and maybe that's an enhancement to discipline.
A good thing,
right? Yeah, and I'd tell my soldiers all the time, hey, as trying as things are, as horrendous as things are, because as some know, I mean, that battalion command tour was pretty hard, and but I'd say you can't default to doing some sort of crazy blood brother cut your palm, you two are going to keep a secret and do some criminal activity, because the only way to keep a secret on the planet is if only one person knows. That's the only way.
Yeah.
And I said, somebody's going to have a crisis of conscience. Somebody's going to go through, AA. Somebody's going to find God. Somebody's going to get in trouble and then leverage that information. So if you're willing to 10 years from now get uprooted from your family and your kids and go to jail because you weren't disciplined, then that's what you got to consider as an individual. And I'd have that talk routinely. And the most proud thing, I mean, our unit was good. Our battalion was, the most decorated battalion in the global war. I mean, is what it's reputed to be. And I knew through many investigations, no one was ever going to knock on my door and say, Colonel Ostlund, 4 of your soldiers have been arrested for war crimes, this or that. Because the soldiers also knew that that's about legacy, and that's the sure way to ruin the legacy of your organization and everything that you've spilt blood for. So.
If we can spend just a minute on that, I think however you go about doing this, you have a way of instilling maybe expectations on your soldiers to say, like, you won't have 4 soldiers that come up and have some type of activity. I mean, at the battalion command level in the infantry, I think many would expect that you have problems. How did you go about, I almost feel like it's a mind shift. Like, how do you embrace that or share those expectations with soldiers? And you've mentioned it before we started recording. I know you're well known for it, like how much you love soldiers, right? And I think sometimes you even just say it very plainly so they hear it. But do you have anything that you, as you're sharing with former colleagues or people you're giving advice to, on how to accomplish that?
Well, first, I think you honestly got to feel it. It's something you can't fake, right? So where does it come from? If we go back to Minnesota, where grandparents, and honestly for me it was adult male role models, taught me about respecting other people. And some people think respect is all kind of kind and soft and
fluffy,
everything.
yeah.
And yeah, and that's not how I was grown up. It was like, respect the effects that people deliver. I just finished my basement. I love talking to the subcontractors and people, and you can imagine some of them don't speak real good English, right? But I got all the respect in the world for them. Why? Because they're delivering incredible effects for stuff I can't do, but I loved watching and talking to them, probably getting in their way, just seeing how they do what they do, but they deliver effects. And that's what I think of our soldiers, whether, I probably went through a phase where if you're not, airborne ranger infantryman, you're not shit, blah, blah, blah. But I quickly matured out of that, probably when I went to the primary leadership development course, when I was 20 years old. About that time, I probably left all that business behind me. And again, not perfect at it, probably failed it sometimes, but at least would try to atone for it. As I went up, I just respected all the effects, regardless of MOS. And so it was more about a team building effort, right? As a captain, I stumbled upon a quote, and I've got the plaque up on my wall over here. I've had it in every office I've been in, and it was from Colin Powell, who I just think sees the world more clearly than probably any other leader or human that I've been exposed to. And I was privileged to meet him a couple of times. But he has a quote that says something, and I'll paraphrase it, is, "You must love your soldier with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your mind. They deserve nothing less." And I mean, that's it, right? And I think, just like, I might have mentioned, I think I mentioned before we started recording, before this deployment with this battalion, I had the battalion in a theater in Vicenza. Many of their parents came to see them off. I had my wife, two sons, 8 and 10, and a 10-day-old son or less, because I deployed when he was 10 days old, with my wife in the front row. And I said, in a few short days, I'm going to care more about you paratroopers than I care about these three boys. And, that I meant that. And I said it, just off the top of my head. And I didn't mean to take away from my sons or hurt my wife, which it did hurt her. And I actually repeated it numerous times through my career. But what I meant is, those boys, my boys, were going to be safe with their mother. These paratroopers, I was going to be the only thing in my mind, right or wrong. I was the only thing that could protect them. And how do I protect them? I clear fires, and I clear them fast. I understand ROE, and I maximize it. I think when we put an American soldier in harm's way, the weight of the United States of America should be behind that individual soldier. And leaders, general officers, flag officers, politicians that have their caveat of excuses for not doing that should just take a pause. Take a pause, because I'm right on this. They aren't. And there's no soldier, ranger, serviceman that's ever been in combat with me that can say Ostlund withheld fires from me. And there's an awful lot of people that wanted to come in and help me. Air Force wanted to help me because I dropped, did 5,300 aerial or 3,800 aerial deliveries, and they wanted to talk to me about economics and bomb use. And, we did 5,300 fire missions, indirect fire missions. And, not surprisingly, the infantry mortarmen or an artilleryman never complained about ammo consumption. But, nor did your peers,
Yep.
the people delivering ammo. But, I'd say Kunar is the fourth smallest province in Afghanistan. But surprisingly, there's always room for one more. So if you want to come out, I can get you hooked up with one of my squads, and you can walk around in hope for ammo consumption, and hope somebody, is more judicious on clearing fires. And surprisingly, I didn't have any takers.
Not a lot of takers.
No, none. I had a lot of good leaders come out and support the troops, ask what we need, and do the best that they could for them. But but those are conversations that I get sarcastic about sometimes. But I don't have a lot of time for bureaucracy. I don't lead through lawyers. I respect them, but I challenge them to get me legally to yes. And I have great relations with the JAGs. And when they have the knowledge, competence, and moxie to say, you're not getting to yes legally on this, okay, and we're probably going to do a different course of action. But we tried. So
So if we can, I want to jump to Kunar in just a minute, but presumably, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, but before that, before you're in that command position, you're in Iraq. I don't know if you've been to Afghanistan yet at that point, but
No, I hadn't.
is there a moment before, so post 9/11, but before you get to Kunar, where you are on the ground in engagements at that point in your career?
No, I mean we had some minor one-sided engagements in Desert Storm, meaning like at hour 99 we attacked a hapless reconnaissance unit in Iraq, and it was less exciting than a live fire exercise, and but we expended a lot of ordnance, and captured a lot of stuff and some people, but you know that was really the extent of my excitement in there. And in fairness, in Desert Storm, I mean, we went into the town of El Qadir and actually recovered two Cobra pilots and recovered their aircraft. They were live, hunkering down because they had a mechanical failure in the middle of the town. That was exciting. And went in on an F-16 where the pilot rejected, and did kind of these CSAR sort of missions.
Yep.
Destroy, like they tell you, destroy all the commo stuff. Because I didn't know it, but an F-16 generally will glide for a long ways after the pilot ejects out. And it looked in pretty good shape. But we had some learning in that, but not real combat. In Kunar, my TAC was in 44 engagements is what we tracked. So we were just, I mean, another maneuver element at times. So, which is, I mean, I don't know if that's a lot or not for a battalion TAC. I think some of my peers that were in Iraq rolling around, Sadr City or something, were probably shot at pretty routinely. And, Eric Kirill up in Mosul, who's getting ready to take over CENTCOM command, got shot up a little bit 3 times up in Mosul. So, I think if you're out there with your HUAs, in combat as a battalion commander, you're probably going to get shot at a couple of times.
So let's really dig into Kunar then. And you had mentioned most decorated unit, Global War on Terror. Just correct me on these numbers if I get them wrong, Bill. But we have 400 awards for valor, 3 Medal of Honor, living Medal of Honor recipients from your time there. It's a 15-month deployment. Did you know it was 15 months going in, or was it an extension?
Yeah, surprisingly, it was. We found out that it was going to be a 15-month deployment when it was on the front page of the Stars and Stripes, which is the newspaper overseas that comes to everybody's house. They deliver it. It's a free newspaper. It's a great newspaper, and it was on the front page. In that morning, I remember because. And I can talk about taking command of that battalion, but one of the many out of the 811 paratroopers that I knew well was a young man named Vandenberg, and Vandenberg was about 6'4" and about 220 pounds, and he looked like a Viking, and he always had a smile on his face, but he was just this powerful presence of a young, paratrooper, and I love talking to the kid. He makes me laugh today. But this young man who was nothing but motivated, when I came in the office that day, I think he was on staff duty, and he's like, "Sir, are we really deploying for 15 months?" And this is a young 18, 19-year-old kid. And I said, "Yeah, it looks like we are." And he said, "Sir, I'm going to have 2 birthdays in Afghanistan." And that just really sunk in me, like, to a young man that's 18 or 19, and they're going to have their 20 and 21st birthday overseas in Afghanistan. That's a big deal. I mean, to me, I don't even remember how old I am now. Am I this old or that old? Shit, let me do some math.
Yeah.
But to a kid that old, I mean, he knows how many when his birthday is, and remembers the last 10 of them. So that really struck me. If Vandenberg is kind of has a reaction to this. We better address this and start talking to our soldiers and our families about this. But so we did know.
And as we talk a little bit about how long you're there and some of the awards that come out of it, I'm just going to ask if you could take us to one or two of the more challenging experiences you had there. And I know you have plenty. Just before that, though, could you help set a little bit of the context for folks who don't know that region at that time, what you were going into?
Yeah, so 173rd had been in Iraq. We'd been in the Kirkuk region, northern region of Iraq, 2003 to 4. I left when we came back in 2004. Went to Stratcom for 2 years, 20 months. Came back to 173rd. In that 20 months, they had done a tour in Afghanistan, down in the southeast, largely in Zabul province, and they did great. They had like I think our battalion had like 6 Silver Star awardees, and just really did an interesting fight, something I never experienced. But they just walked from Kalat to Kalat, from village to village, in Zabul province, and cleared enemy and fought them. It was just like a year-long movement to contact. Did a super job. So I came back 20 months later. They had just come back, had a phenomenal battalion commander in Mark Stammer, and he did a great transition with me. And we were told we were going back to Iraq, to Hawija, which we were very familiar with because that was in the Ottoman or Kirkuk province when we had been there as a brigade. Contested area, highly Arab area on the southern end of the Kurdish region. Excuse me. So we knew it was going to be a kinetic fight. So we started training pretty hard for that. We were up in JMRC, which is a Joint Multinational Readiness Center in Germany. That's where we largely did our collective training. Being based out of Italy, just a great training area. And we got the word, hey, we're not going to Iraq. As you saw, it's going to be 15 months. We're going to Afghanistan, and you're going to a place called Kunar Nuristan, and we're going on a PDSS here in a couple of days. So we left JMRC, got on airplanes, flew out. We were very fortunate to fly into Jalalabad Air Base, or airfield,
Okay.
in 310, 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain, under then Colonel McNicholson was based out of there. And they really had all of the, I think from Kandahar all the way up to Jalalabad, and we're pushing into Kunar. The battalion commander I was hooked up with was Chris Cavoli, who's a 4-star now. And he was between McNicholson and Chris Cavoli. They could have not, it would be impossible, and this plays into a later story, but it would be impossible to do a better transition. We had like two days of academics, and, McNicholson was the first captain at West Point. He's a smart, very, very likable, and I'll give him credit, handsome dude. I mean, he stands up there and he captivates an audience. And I just went to school on COIN in their version. This was before COIN doctrine and what we were doing. Then we drove up there. Chris Cavoli talked nonstop. I mean, the guy speaks 7 languages. He's a Princeton grad. He's just incredibly smart person, right? And, we're driving up there, and again, I'm getting a PhD version on what I'm getting into. Takes us 6.5 hours to drive from Asadabad down to Camp Blessing, about 23.5 kilometers. But Chris has a solution because he's paving that road, and he's making progress. We get to Camp Blessing, we stop along. Chris can, chat with everybody along, knows everybody along there, and we get in there. His XO and 3 are doing nothing but busting their ass, setting the footprint for us as we set in there, building brick buildings and this and that. And this is a unit that already had people back in 10th Mountain, back at Fort Drum, and had been fighting hard, very hard. back at Fort Drum. They call those people at Fort Drum, hey, repack your stuff and come back. We've been extended for 4 months and we need you back in country. We need you back in this hard fight. And that unit, 132, who will, I'm obligated to sing their praises, didn't miss a bleep and did nothing but try to be perfect at setting us up for success. And this is important, going to be important later. So we come in there, I fly back to JMRC en route. I'm like, this is what I learned, showing pictures, and got all my leaders, I think E6 and above. And I gave a presentation. This is what we're getting into. Hey, our training path is just fine. We're doing just fine. It doesn't matter where we go on the planet. We're going to focus on the same kind of big 6 things that we focus on, and we're going to do them well. So we got after it, finished our training. We deployed to this area. So what is Kunar? Kunar is in the northeast corner of Afghanistan. It's a small, very rugged, very historic province in the sense that there's just a lot of history. They were the last people to transition to Islam or be converted to Islam. They were called the infidels or the kafirs, and for a long time. These valleys look like the Rocky Mountains in the sense that each valley has a tribe or a clan and a dialect. If they want to talk across valleys, they can. If they don't want to be understood, they can ensure they're not. These peaks go 18,000 feet high. Again, because 132 was just pushed up in there, very, very remote areas. Wes Morgan recently did a book called The Hardest Place that really talks about the history of this region, that it went from a CT only fight because we didn't want boots on the ground to a conventional only fight, back to a CT fight, a counterterrorism fight, because we pulled the conventional forces out. But it's very rugged, austere. The platoons that I dispersed took over 15 bases. From my PDSS, I wanted to close some of them because they were air centric, meaning I couldn't reinforce them by ground, and I couldn't resupply them. And to me, that was more risk than I thought was warranted. But that played out at 14 and a half months into the tour. So that's kind of what we're at. Some of the most beautiful places. I mean, I've obviously lived in northern Italy, been in the Alps, been through Austria, Germany, Garmisch. Equally beautiful area, just contested.
Yeah,
and interesting people up there.
So as you're getting in, can you give us, if you could take us to maybe 1 or 2 of these harder moments that you dealt with, kind of set the scene and what you were having to go through? And I know you got plenty to choose from. I would just ask what comes to mind for you.
Well, what always comes to mind is we're on Camp Blessing, a little camp. It's, maybe 400 yards, on each side, beautiful along the Kunar River. And we're doing our transfer of authority with Chris Cavoli, a guy in a unit I really respect, and he's going to case his unit colors, and I'm going to uncase mine, symbolically showing that I am now in charge. And Chris leaves, and I will say that I knew some people in the AWG, the Asymmetrical Warfare Group, which was a really neat organization the Army stood up, that tried to capture lessons and processes. And I asked a team to come in and bridge between Chris and me. So they came in about 4 weeks early. They stayed about 4 weeks and helped us gain situational understanding of the area, understand what we didn't know, leap us ahead, and quite honestly, try to keep my soldiers alive while we figured out what we were doing, or I should say paratroopers. So we finished that. We'd already been in a few contacts, because it's about a 2-week process to come in into that area. And I'm in the talk, planning to go out my first day, the next day, and I hear a report of TIC, troops in contact. So this is 6 hours after TOA. And I hear
this 6 hours after you take command. Basically, you're in charge.
Right.
TOA in this case. So you just have the
Yes.
flag, basically.
Exactly. 6 hours into the 15-month tour, and we have a TIC. And I hear a transmission that we have a KIA, and then I'm not hearing anything more. And in my talk and in my processes, we don't badger people for information. I let the commanders fight. I pull what I need to get them fires, resources, support, medevac, and don't ask for needless information in those opening minutes. So we're monitoring, and it's been a while, and I'm hearing the fight going on, and I'm hearing cryptic transmissions coming back and forth, and I don't have a clear picture. I'm kind of new to this command thing in combat. So I start asking questions. And eventually I call down to the talk, because we did have large landlines, and I called down there, and I heard we do have a KIA. So we go through our processes, our medevac, but that sets the tone for the Korengal Valley, that we actually do have a KIA. Very good company commander, recent brigade command select, Dan Kearney, was running the Korengal Valley. And so as we do, we get our casualties medevac. We find, kind of do an after action review and follow up, and the period continues through that. But what happens 6 hours into a 15-month tour? There's a couple of things I got to get my arms around. Is we've got 15 months left. So what is my posture? People are going to take my cue, and my cue is, hey, we're going to celebrate those who live their lives for others, and you're going to go back out in the fight tonight and tomorrow and for 15 months. And that's the way it goes. We're going to do a great memorial ceremony, and we're going to continue the mission. So that was the tone we set from there. In the next 3 months in the Korengal Valley, Dan Kearney, I think, had 7 people killed. And I think it was 43 wounded in that first 9 months. And people can, there's a book called War by Sebastian Junger that categorizes or follows a platoon in there. And Sebastian Junger and Tim Hetherington were super. And they did the documentaries Restrepo in Korengal, and it really shows what that area is like. And that goes back to, there's goodness about letting media in. I let them in with 2 conditions. I said, hey, all of my paratroopers are doing the very best they can. So first, understand that. Number 2, they all have families. As long as you don't hurt my paratroopers or their families, I'll facilitate your access, and access to anything. And everyone I had, honestly, supported that. And thus, the whole rack over here is books about our unit, where we're talked about, mentioned, or written about, which, I'm not doing it for the publicity. I'm doing it to honor the men. So their stories are captured. My stories aren't in there. Their stories are in there. So we go forward, and Dan Kearney says, hey, I cannot sustain for 15 months with this level of casualties. We need a battalion operation in here. Okay. So collectively, we planned Rock Avalanche. And one thing on naming conventions, I see some units still today, they'll have Operation Frisky Weasel. Okay. Why do you do that? We had Rock Avalanche, Rock Penetrator, these type of battles. And when I told people this, I said, look, if I have a young paratrooper killed, I don't want to tell their dad or mom that they were killed in Operation Clown Show, because you, as a staff whacker, think that that's really funny. your cynicism's coming out. That stuff's not happening in this unit. And I haven't had that happen anywhere. But it's something people should take into mind, because we did do Rock Avalanche. And what happened in Rock Avalanche? It was a 3-day, 4-day operation starting at the end of March or October 22nd through the 26th. We killed a lot of enemy people. We killed some innocent people, some civilians that happened to be around the bad guys. This is all captured in Restrepo. You can see it. And you can see the emotion of American soldiers when that happens. And, I was flown in to do shuras with these people and talk about our way ahead. On the last day of the operation, I flew in and met with a shura, and the security element was the element that Sal Junta was in. And one of the photographers took a picture of Josh Brennan, Hugo Mendoza, and Sal Junta, the only 3 people in there. Hugo and Josh are sleeping and Sal standing up almost like pulling guard. Then I flew out, took Tim Hetherington, the photographer who broke his ankle, with me. And that platoon, it was really a squad, platoon minus platoon leader, and a squad moved back to the Korengal outpost. We were watching them. I'd been up for about 96 hours, and that is humanly possible. And I was watching them. We're about done. They're 700 yards from the cop, and we had a predator over them, which made me feel really, really good. And all of a sudden, I saw them take an action, and you can see that, unlike in movies, you don't see individual people in their kit. We know that have looked at it. It's white blobs, but you can see them moving much faster than they were in dispersing. Near simultaneously, I got the radio call there in a tick. And that was the tick that Sal Junta earned his Medal of Honor in. That his best friend, Josh Brennan, was Alpha team leader, was leading the element back through, they walked through a near ambush. Josh was shot 7 times, but was still alive. Sal Junta, the Bravo team leader, ran through a near ambush, and he said something to the effect, it was like, running through a swarm of fireflies with all the tracers. He saw his squad leader go down, shot in the head. Pulled him behind cover, and he was just knocked out. Pulled him behind cover, kept running through a near ambush, saw 2 enemy carrying off his best friend, shot, killed one of them, wounded the other, pulled his best friend to cover, throwing grenades, as he was going through. Shot in his vest, shot in an AT-4 he was carrying, and ultimately, saved his best friend, who was medevaced and then subsequently died of wounds. But as I couldn't see this on the Predator feed, but I was monitoring the battle, and I talked to Dan Kearney the next morning, and Dan kind of gave me the rundown and everything. And I made the comment to Dan. I said, if Sal didn't earn the Medal of Honor by those actions, our country needs to admit Medal of Honors only go to dead people. And that was a catalyst for Dan Kearney to start writing his nomination for that. Nobody knew how to do that, right? But I mean, the regulations are pretty clear on that. So we wrote the packet, and I had a great West Point English major and my HHC commander, Leo Floor, would not rewrite, but write all of our awards, review them, I should say, after we went through an awards board. And this is an important part. I didn't like the awards process when we were in Iraq. I thought it was emotional. I had general officers recommending brigade commanders for Silver Stars, basically for service. Battalion commanders getting in staffs getting Bronze Stars for V, just because they were kind of in a contested area. But my take was, if you can't sit on a bar stool and tell a compelling story, maybe you ought to pass on the Valor Award, right? So what we did before we deployed, we had a matrix, and it's been distributed throughout the Army, but it's the ward's decision matrix. So it has a picture of the award. Here's a Medal of Honor. It's called the Medal of Honor. This is what the regulation says it is for. And this is how we interpret that regulation. Won the battle when the battle was all but lost. Because the regulation, the difference between a DSC and a Medal of Honor is very slight. And in fact, it says, I think DSC says something like, the same valor as a Medal of Honor, but slightly less or something, not quite the level of a Medal of Honor. Okay, well, because it's so objective or subjective. So we tried to put some objectivity into it. So when the emotion of a battle and KIAs came in, we had some touchstone to do. So we had a very effective and efficient awards process and collective understanding. And it wasn't about servicing people. It was about recognizing people up against an objective standard.
Bill, are you still there? Did I lose you?
A valorous unit award.
Oh,
and
Bill, can I hold you for 1 sec? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you froze
So
for a second there.
Yeah, let me. So couple questions as we talk about that most recent kind of engagement and the award process, which I wish I had figured out, because the award process was very difficult for me as a company commander because of the subjectivity that went into it and the emotions. And it never occurred to me to how do you strip that out, basically. So I wish I had that. But as you mentioned, within 6 hours, you have a KIA of a 15-month deployment. And you said, I think what everybody would hope from their leadership, which is, we need to keep going, right? But I just wonder, you're in this isolated area. How did you come to that decision? How did you take this in emotionally when you treat these paratroopers like your kids? Like, who could you confide in? What did you do to come to that decision?
Well, I was very, very, very fortunate to have a phenomenal sergeant major in 2 field grades and an op sergeant major. Just our team, I mean, it was pretty strong, but we were strong. But I had to lead that team too. I will share because I usually wrap this into the end. That paratrooper was empirically our youngest paratrooper. That paratrooper's family lived in Vicenza, meaning I watched him PCS into Vicenza as a high school grad, knowing he was going to Fort Benning, going to airborne school. And that young paratrooper was our brigade sergeant major's oldest son. And I was friends with him. And Sergeant Major Viamoto proudly told me, hey, Timothy, when he comes back, I'm assigning him to your brigade or your battalion. Arrogantly or naively, I thought, because we were the best battalion. Well, I assigned him to what I thought was, the best company at that time. He assigned him to the best platoon, who assigned him to the best squad, Sergeant Rice's squad. And again, when I say best, for anybody that listens, that's not taken away from anyone, but guess what? At points in time, there is the best, at least the perceived best. Well, the youngster in the best squad and the best platoon and the best company and the best battalion in the 173rd is also going to be in harm's way. And Sergeant Major Viamoto, as he's escorting his oldest son back to the United States of America for burial in San Jose, which, by the way, was 30 minutes from my house when I lived in California, and I visited him several times, he wrote me a email, me and Sergeant Major Myers and me, the most powerful email that I've ever received in my life. 70 hours after his oldest son was killed under my command. And he basically said, hey, Timothy, could have been a college athlete. He could have been a missionary in our church. He chose to follow in my footsteps, which I'm very proud he did. He died doing what he wanted to do. We've got 15 months. You and Sergeant Major Myers have a tough fight in many days ahead. I'll be back soon. Sergeant Major Villamoto. And when you talk about, the Army, the services being a family business, and he's got an older daughter, or Timothy's younger sister is in the Army, paratrooper, a family business. And let me talk about Sergeant Major Villamoto. So he did multiple tours, and I'd see him when I was with the Counterterrorism Task Force, and we're close, and he won't mind me sharing this story. But he went out as a sergeant major, as the RC sergeant major, first Cav sergeant major, I believe. He went out to a funeral for a memorial ceremony for a fallen paratrooper or a fallen soldier, and the first sergeant kind of looked at him like he was some sort of headquarters person coming out there, and he's like, you don't know what we're going through, this and that. And Sergeant Major Villamoto just said, you're right, First Sergeant. I'm sorry for your loss.
Wow.
Really, the first sergeant, National Guard unit, closer than some units, a lot of family in those units. He didn't know what the sergeant major had been through. Yeah. But when you talk about servant leadership, humility, just good personness, that's a word I'll make up. That man has it. That family has it. So yeah, that's, was that a tough day? Yeah, it was a tough day, but it taught me a lot about myself and about leadership and about the people that I serve with, and the need for resilience and the ability to bounce. And that would pay dividends 14 months later when we had the Battle of Wanat, and it would pay dividends many times in different things that we had going on there.
How about the Battle of Wanat? If we talk a bit about that, and there's a little bit, and I won't keep you too much longer. You've given me so much time, Bill, so I'm sorry for taking all this time. This is fascinating. There's a bit about you describing yourself as just voracious reader, trying to learn what you can. Do you think there's any way you could have learned this much in that short period of time as what you kind of went through from a leadership gauntlet? That type of intensity from the enemy forces, the terrain, what you were leading. Is there any other way you could have learned that much in that short period of time?
Yeah, I think those of us that have been in combat, and when people talk about missing combat, it's because I think we're at the pinnacle of life, in you're fully living every minute. And you flying Apaches into harm's way. I mean, you're going out looking for a fight all the time. Us driving around Kunar, walking around Kunar, we're out there with a purpose. But there's also a serenity in knowing you're where you need to be at the right time, and it's a learning laboratory for those who are intellectually curious and intellectually stimulated. You're just senses. It's like you're learning from the bottoms of your feet, and the pain in your shoulders, and your eyes see so much more, your ears hear so much more. I think not only are you alive 7 days a week for an extended period of time, but your sensors are taking in so much more, and your brain's processing better, and you're not distracted by alcohol or medicines or sugar or silliness, or you're just kind of focused on living and being the best version of yourself that you can be. So yeah, I think you learn a lot in combat, and it's a choice that some people can make, some can't, is to make that a real positive experience. And my first section leader, when I talk about being mentored, was Mike Matt. Mike Matt was one of the few enlisted soldiers. He was a Sergeant E5 who got a Bronze Star V in Grenada. And in my in-processing counseling, the man said something, and he's still a close friend, and he was at my retirement, and he said, hey, my dad was in combat on 5 tours. He did 1 in Korea and 4 in Vietnam, which is, unheard of, right? And he said, so my dad's advice on combat, which I kind of followed in Grenada, was, hey, you only get the opportunity to go to combat so many times. So when, and this is a guy with 5 tours, which we couldn't fathom back then, right? But you only get so many opportunities. So when you go, be prepared and enjoy it. And that resonated with me for my whole life, is be prepared and enjoy it. And my section leader followed up with, and it's easier to enjoy if you are prepared, which is right,
Yeah.
But it was foundational initial counseling from a section leader. So, in Wanat, I mean, we had a couple of we had 1,100 engagements with the enemies, but we actually had real battles in Kunar. So we had, Rock Avalanche, which went for 3 days. 2 weeks later, we had the 9 November ambush, where I had 6 people killed, 1 Marine and 5 paratroopers killed, and that's where Kyle White earned his Medal of Honor. If I back up to like August 30th, we had the Battle of the Ranch House. They hadn't heard a shot fired in 90 days. Then overwhelming attack happened up at the ranch house. And I had 11 of 22 people wounded. And, the platoon leader ended up calling 810 strike in on his small base and killed the commander inside the wire. They'd shot 13 RPGs, collapsed a position, got inside the wire. They filmed it all because they thought they were going to be there. We captured the film of them fighting our soldiers 10 meters away. Grenades being exchanged, RPGs. The platoon leader, Matt Ferrara, was awarded a Silver Star. Eric Phillips, a DSC. Jason Baldwin, a Silver Star in that battle. And then a few weeks later, Matt Ferrara was killed in this ambush after he went back to that town to see what they needed for the winter. He died with the list what that town needed, that little village needed to make it through the winter. He died with that in his pocket. And then we had a Hanukkah and Miracle battle where it went 16 hours. Clearing the Waterpour Valley, and they'd been in engagements for 16 straight hours, had multiple people wounded, and evacuated. Honecker and Miracle were killed. Only time we went up against a sniper in that area, all 5 people from a gun team were shot, and then we killed the sniper. But Lou Freddick, a phenomenal company commander, that night, he was consolidated in very, very, very talented company commander, a linguist with incredible skills, could speak, Portuguese, Italian, German, learned how to speak Pashto in 6 weeks. He was conversing, carrying on conversations. And this young captain, great officer, called and said, "Sir, we're consolidated. We're ready for extraction." After the 16-hour battle. And this was a hard call as a company commander or as a battalion commander. I said, he was Able 6, and I said, Able 6, do you have accountability of all your personnel and equipment? Roger that. He said, we're ready to be extracted. He said, they're coming out of the mountains like the Viet Cong. And he later reported, they were coming down in droves with flashlights, coming down where they were on this kind of plateau on a ridge line. And we had every asset in RC East over top of us. And we were just dropping bombs, Apaches, everything, Preds. And I said, and he said, we need to be extracted to live to fight another day. They're coming out of the mountains like Viet Cong. And I said, all right. I said, okay, you're going to live to fight another day, but that day is starting right now. I'm going to reinforce you, resupply you, and I want you to keep killing those people coming out of the mountains. And I kept him there, through the night, late into the next day, and they continued to transform that valley, and we extracted them. Fortunately, they didn't have any more casualties, but I mean, that's a risk, right? So if he was right and had 6 or 10 more casualties or deaths, and I was wrong, we probably wouldn't have the relationship we have today. And there'd probably be a lot of people questioning that. But who has the right answer on that? Do I pull back so that these 200 or 300 people who are coming out of the mountains can attack his base when they're ready? And I wasn't using them as bait. I was using them as an infantry company, of paratroopers to, destroy those who were trying to destroy us. That's a tough battle. It's a tough thing, and you learn a lot. So, we keep going into the winter, and what's the Battle of Wanat? Well, we'd been there 14 and a half months. As I said at the beginning, there were 2 bases that I wanted to close, that I needed air support, air lift to close, and that was Bella and in the ranch house. I was right about both of them. We had the Battle of Ranch House, and for IO reasons, we stayed there another 6 weeks with people in harm's way, consolidated down into Bella, still an air-centric place. Tried to move it and get the support from higher to move it. And as I always give them, the respect for, the leadership was not keeping assets sitting on Bagram Airfield. It was just about priority. And, as I reflect back and have recorded in other areas in books, is I think because we could fight, that it gave the leadership the opportunity to say, okay, we can keep moving other things and prioritizing and hauling orange juice and mail to people over here and everything, but we'll eventually get there. The turning point was when the brigade that came behind me, brigade commander, came out and said, Bill, I'm coming in with a smaller unit and they're not trained like you are. You have to move that. I'm like, okay, I'm trying, but I don't have the resources. But what does this also go back to? A point I made earlier. Chris Cavoli was perfect at setting me up for success. And he set a very high bar on what I needed to do for the people behind me, coming in behind me. So when I see a brigade commander look the way John Spicer did, great officer, say, you need to do this. The battalion coming in behind you can't do it. Okay. That's very clear to me. So we were going to get Wanat set up. People didn't like it. In 2020 hindsight, people hated it. That I took this unit at 14 and a half months, the people that had been in 1,100 engagements, or, the battalion had done, 5,300 fire missions and 3,800 aerial deliveries, and had been through, scores of issues, and understood the people. I'm like, no, we are going to do this. We'd been planning it for months. I mean, I had engineer surveys and plans, and went through the stateside planning process, which was ridiculous, we had to do, and had multiple iterations of what that fob was going to be, set conditions. We did the move on the 4th day of the move. So that's an extraction from Bella and a move up from Blessing. We'd been there for 4 days. And on the 4th morning, 200 to 300 people attacked this platoon. Platoon had two platoons of 155 in direct support, 2 120s, a 60, and gun trucks and all this, and was very well resourced and fought phenomenally well. Killed scores of enemy, but the enemy got their licks in too, and we lost 9 paratroopers killed 2 weeks from redeployment, 27 wounded when, parents and family members, and everybody was like, hey, their bags are already back. And so that was a long battle. Matt Meyer was the company commander and was phenomenal. The story I hadn't told is back in July, a year prior to that, we had to go into another squadron's area and find and recover a fallen soldier that they were unable to recover, that they'd lost in a battle. And Matt Meyer led that flawlessly, that mission. That was an attack on a hill called the Fritchie Recovery. But he was a phenomenal officer that had been fighting for 15 months. And in that battle was our third Medal of Honor awardee, was Ryan Pitts, was awarded a Medal of Honor. That Eric Phillips was awarded a Silver Star. So in one tour, was awarded DSC and a Silver Star. So, it was investigated on RC East level by brigade, then by RC East. Hey, it was, you did everything you could, a tactical victory at a tragically high cost. I departed in like 1 August or something, got back to Italy, changed command August 30th, went to the Rangers, went through RASP the first week of October, and was back in Afghanistan in October, about 8 weeks later. Yeah, had moved my family to Benin.
Wow.
And just doing a learning about the counterterrorism task force for about 6 weeks over there. And that was interesting. So then I started going port starboard with the commander, and had very good interactions, and a whole nother story about what the influence was on the counterterrorism task force and being more integrated with the battle space owners and conventional forces. But then I was commanding the task force in the next July, so a year after Wanat. And we had a super high op tempo, 15 strike forces going in every single night, many of them recycling. And I had a great task force commander. The S3 of 1st Ranger Battalion was Johnny Chung, a 2-time brigade commander right now. And Johnny was on the enemy, and we did about a 72-hour operation culminating, called Marauder Rapids. Again, not funny clown show, but Marauder Rapids, where we lost a Delta Master Sergeant, but we killed 124 enemy, and destroyed a huge logistic base in Coast, by the way. And then I got a call from the USASOC commander, General Mulholland. And I thought he was going to call and say, hey, good job. You guys are killing it, literally. And he said, hey, Bill, why not? He said, there's a reporter from the Washington Post on Bagram right now that wants to talk to you. He said he's there because there's going to be a big splash about another investigation into Wanat. I said, sir, I've been up 72 hours. I said, I got to get some sleep. I got a task force to run. He's like, okay, no pressure. And he called back 5 minutes later, and he said, hey, Bill, General Corelli, who was the vice chief at that time, and who I have all the respect in the world for both of these men, he said, General Corelli said, no pressure, but he'd really want you to talk to Greg Jaffe. And I'm like, okay, sir, I've been a soldier for a while. I understand. I got it. And they're just like, hey, you know your unit story better than anyone. So talked to Greg Jaffe for 8 hours. One piss break and potty break, we'll say, and bio break, I guess, in Google terms. Mm-hmm. And did that, and Greg Jaffe put out a 3-day article on it. But that began 2.5 years of investigation into the Battle of Wanat, as generated by one of the Gold Star fathers that rallied kind of the other Gold Star people. I'd been promoted to colonel. I was a infantryman, promoted 3 times BZ. I was running the task force with a Delta Squadron, SEAL Team 6 Squadron, Task Force 160th, the Ranger Battalion, 1,000 intel analysts. And I got a letter from the Secretary of the Army that said, My promotion was on hold. I could be frocked, maintain my frock rank and my duties. But if the investigation found negative performance, then I'd be, busted to 05 and, face all this other things to include possibly jail, but keep leading the task force. So I was like, okay, awesome. So, I read the letter, how the investigations go through, then they tell you the findings, and I had the opportunity to sit down now. So a Marine Corps Lieutenant General who will be named and known later will, said we failed to plan, failed to resource, failed to lead the organization, and that's what it was. CENTCOM commander at that time, General Petraeus, who, another story I failed to mention is as a second lieutenant, it was my platoon that shot him in the chest on the live fire range. So we'd been pretty well connected since then. He held no animosity, but he took what, the Marine Corps said, being, objective, and said, okay, well, that's what they found. And suggested or recommended to the Army that I get, a letter of reprimand. So that has to go through Army channels. So, I'm still leading the task force back and forth, and I get that. And then there's a whole process that goes through. So, what the Army didn't know, and I like to tell the Army, is, I talked about soldiers. I wanted to write a book. I've got it over here. It's called Doc Toe. It was a book about 173rd in Vietnam, and it was written by one of the leaders for the paratroopers. I planned on doing the same thing. So I kept more information and have more information about that tour than anybody on the planet. And I have it organized and had it organized. So I went through the letter of reprimand, word by word, and provided information, about 900 pages of documents that, countered that. The Army adjudicated it and retracted the letter. The letter I got was 3 pages long. The retraction was 10 pages long. And a 15-page letter went to the Secretary of the Army. So I thought, great, now I'm going into brigade command of 325 in Hawaii, but not so fast, because the process then is, okay, the letter of reprimand was good, but now we're going to do a promotion review board, and that's going to take about a year. So you get to go through the same process. And you get to keep rotating over and leading the counterterrorism task force and be the JSOC LNO to the ISAF commander, who was General Petraeus, and do these just weird. So to me, it was like a lot of, for 2.5 years, it was like Forrest Gump moments. And so I'm doing this, and I'm starting to feel like Briar Rabbit or Brer Rabbit. I'm in the thorn bush, but loving every day. And then I started, after the letter was revoked, I had a little bit of smugness, kind of like, okay. But then we had to go through another year of command review board to see if I was worthy to be a commander, because I'd been selected for command. So that just kept me fixed in place in the 75th Ranger Regiment for 3 years, rotating back and forth overseas. But I knew the stink associated with it, regardless of 30 letters from generals that had served with me, and in subordinates, and in, Gold Star dads and this and that, that was going to be too much for the Army to swallow, going forward from there. So that there's some power in being a terminal colonel, in the sense, now younger GOs were getting promoted that knew me when they were lieutenant colonels, and I was a colonel when they were majors, and I was a colonel, and that was fine, because, I wasn't serving to be a field marshal. I was serving because I enjoyed serving and doing, and I got to do continuously good jobs, right? Then go from brigade command, another tour overseas in Zabul, come back, and then be the SOCOM commander's XO for 2 years. And then when General Votel moved to CENTCOM, go over, be his CAG director, and then finish up as DMI. But it's all cumulative, right? I mean, and DMI, Department of Military Instruction at West Point, go all the way back to my most rewarding assignment, in seeing these people, the next generation. So, that's kind of the summary, if you will. People are by now there's two people listening, my mom and yours.
No. They're going to love this. I'm telling you.
Yeah, there's again, on this plaque behind me, it says 1,344 glorious days. And that's how I looked at the experience. Not every day was easy, but every day was rewarding in some way.
So I've got 3 more questions. There's 2 I ask everybody, and then I'll let you get out of here. But I especially after talking about what you just did and how much you cared for people under your command, you've mentioned that your son is now in service.
Yeah.
And so now you're on the other side of this effectively. How has that changed your mentality or how you look at this?
Yeah. In all seriousness, I routinely say the hardest deployment I've ever been on is this one. And being a parent, kind of with my skill set, knowledge, it's very hard to sit on a pine and have my oldest son in harm's way. He recently, let me know he earned his cab, and I told him, awards and accolades, be careful what you ask for, because I have, Timothy Biamoto earned a CIB too, 6 hours in. And so it's a hard tour. Looking forward to him getting back from where he's at. He's got a hard step, another dangerous step coming up here shortly. And then, hopefully we'll get him back pretty soon.
Okay. And then the 2 questions I ask everybody, Bill, interested to hear, was there anything that you carried with you into combat that had sentimental value, good luck, something that somebody gave you that you always wanted to have with you or on you?
Yeah, I always have St. Christopher's medal on my dog tags, the same one. Actually, the one that I jumped into Iraq with, all the time. Again, I have since, and we talked about it earlier, and I never finished answering the question, but I've honestly thought every day after 19 plus into 20 and beyond is gravy. I have very, very comfortable with where I sit, although we talked about, I know I got some entry requirements here to work through, but I've never been afraid of, the only time I've felt fear in my life was in a dream, and it's when I couldn't move. So I'm not superstitious in a way, but I am spiritual in the sense that, I do, as we were talking about earlier too, I do believe in some of the Viking philosophy that everything, and I've said in articles before, is I honestly believe there's worse things than dying in combat. And you and I both have peers that are forever young, and we idealize them more and more every day. And that's how we honor our fallen. So
last one here. I think I know the answer, but I always love to ask this. With everything you've been through, 6 years of deployments, and I think, if I'm counting right, like 35 years of service, would you go back and do that again? All that sacrifice and pain?
Yeah, I get to talk to a lot of cadets and still cadets, ROTC and ROT in West Point, and when I meet young officers and cadets, I'm like, nobody I consider a friend would not trade to be in your boots today.
I say
Not
that all
one.
the time.
Yeah, and I laugh and I'll say, now I'd like to go into your boots with your body, my knowledge, and my paycheck, but I'd go straight up too. If it's just going straight up, I'll go straight up and try it again. And because I think we all get to the same point. What do we miss? I mean, you and I, again, we're pretty cautious about mentioning who we work for now, but it's easy enough to find out. We work with good people. We work with really good people that are good at their job. But I still miss the Army people, the service people I was with. I mean, there's so many, even today. I've just started last night. In fact, last night, I put a Ranger scroll and tab on my Forerunner on the back window.
Yeah.
It's about this big. I mean, it's
Love it.
noticeable. It's the first time since I was a second lieutenant, when I had all my hero badges on my Ford Ranger truck, that I put something like that on my vehicle. But and I wear Ranger Regiment, old PT shirts to the gym. I go 7 days a week down to the local gym, and I do that. I've learned, why do I do that now? Because I want somebody to recognize it and say something, and let's have an opportunity. I met 2 former Rangers in the gym, and it takes me 5 seconds to suss out if they really were or
it's
not.
Easy.
But then you just have that sense of family and community in yet another part of my life. I might drink a beer with them, might not, might just see them in the gym. But that's what you miss. You miss those like-minded, committed people that have shared experiences, or at least step forward for the same shared sacrifice.
I think that's a perfect place to leave it. Thanks so much for all the time, Bill. This was great. I'm telling you, people are going to love this. It reminded me of one that I did with Todd Opalski. I don't know if you know him, former Marine, who was enlisted, recon, ROTC officer, went to Delta for several years, and he just loved his troops so much. It could just come through the same way it does with you. And I think people are going to really appreciate it. So thank you from me to you.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, thanks for the time. I mean, this, honestly, I think for both of us, this is like therapeutic. I asked you before why you do it and how it's working and stuff. But the therapeutic nature of just having conversations like this is invaluable. So thank you. And thank you to your audience for, you win a prize. I owe you a beer or cup of coffee if you made it this far. So just text me, let me know.
I love it.
Not
Thanks
all 78,000 of you, but
no.
all right.
Thanks
First one.
Yeah. Our first comment is from YouTube on the James Razone video from Dave Poland. Incredible episode and amazing content on a consistent basis. I've been a military and combat enthusiast since I can remember, and I have to say that listening to your podcast informs and entertains me beyond belief, and honestly makes me feel an envy that I didn't think was possible. I'm in my later 30s now and truly feel like I missed a calling as part of the SF community. I started early in life with the Navy and never followed through when I had the chance. I'm remembering your episode with Navy SEAL Eddie Penny when he talked about people being too scared to make such a big decision because they were thinking of step 50 instead of steps 1, 2, and 3. I now know that was me, but am making new promises to myself to never let that happen to me again in life. In my adult life, I've had that mindset, but just never realized that I may have let it slip through my fingers. Truly inspiring episode, and so awesome to hear you and all your guests tell their stories. I'm hooked. Keep them coming. I wanted to share this one in particular, I think just because of what Dave is saying here, but also because of what he's mentioning about James and this James Razone interview. I think this is one that's hugely underestimated, and over time will get a lot of traction. It's not a door kicker, but it's more about the interrogator and what goes on inside that interrogation booth that enabled so many operations for people like Eddie in DEVGRU and Opalski with Delta and the Marines. I would encourage those who haven't heard it yet to give it a shot, not just for the combat experience or discussion, but also James is just a fascinating person and what he's gone on to do to find meaning after the military. I think so many will understand and appreciate. But Dave, thank you for leaving that and sharing a lot about yourself in that comment. Our second comment is also on YouTube about the interview with my father, and it's from Clinton Carway. And he says, to say I'm a fan of this channel would be an understatement. I've watched every episode, and I wish this would happen every time you mentioned your father. You can see that you're proud of him, and you can see how proud he is of his son. Thank you both for your service, and thank you both for this wonderful interview. Yeah, for those who are the diehard listeners, I can tell you've tuned in to that episode in particular. I really appreciate it. I think people really enjoyed hearing it, and it was my father at his best, like how I remember him, really talking about what was going on. He's, as you can tell, very matter of fact, very much a realist, and what he experienced there and the similarities to Afghanistan, as some others have pointed out in the comments. So thank you for sharing that, Clinton. I appreciate that you enjoyed that interview with my old man as much as I did.